There's so many different practice amps out there, so many different ways you can do it. And for a lot of us, these practice setups are how we hear our guitars most of the time. So I think it is worth the effort to, find a practice setup that creates a pleasing sound so that we can get on with enjoying playing the guitar. I don't gig out as much these days, so I play at home a lot more than I used to, and I've just spent a fair bit of time figuring out a few different practice setups that work for what I do. So I just thought I'd do this video sharing what I've learned and hopefully help simplify things for any of you who are thinking of upgrading your practice setup or just feeling a bit overwhelmed by the amount of options there are out there. For players like me who like old valve amps, and especially for players who gig out with valve amps a lot, then probably the most ideal and sort of luxurious setup, I suppose, would be to use that amp that you use out at gigs for your home practice as well. So you've always got your favourite sound all of the time, whether you're in the studio, whether you're playing live, whether you're practicing at home, you've got that continuity. I did this for a while on my Fender Pro Reverb, and it has its upsides and its downsides depending on what you're practicing. So if you're practicing, say, a lot of scale drills and exercises and sight reading, stuff like that, then it's definitely overkill. You're going to be putting a load of unnecessary wear on like your valves and your amp, stuff like that. It's not really energy efficient, but if you're, say, practicing for an upcoming gig, or you just want the closest sound to the sound you have when you're playing gigs with your valve amp, or maybe you're doing high quality home recording, stuff like that, then it's definitely worth considering. I've got a whole video on different ways of managing the volume of loud valve amplifiers that you might want to check out, but some amps just have a perfectly good master volume control, but a lot of old school valve amps don't. So a simple attenuator is one of the best solutions for just adding a master volume control. They often have a line out with a cab simulator, so you can use them for like silent practice and recording. I personally use this kind of setup when I'm in the final stages of rehearsing for a gig or something like that. It's, when I'm not just practicing the parts anymore, it's practicing the details in the sound, which pedals I'm going to use, what are the exact amp settings that I think will work best, stuff like that. I use it for recording here at home quite a bit as well, but to sum up, this way of using a medium to high powered valve amp as your practice amp is what I'd recommend if you really want a no expense spared sort of solution. It is expensive, it is inefficient, but if you want your practice amp to feel exactly like your ideal gigging amp, then this really is one of the most genuine ways to do it. You can also try using a low powered valve amp or one with power switching, but beware, even a 5-watt low powered valve amp can be ear splitting in a small room. My Marshall SV20 on its 5-watt setting, I can easily gig with that as long as I want it to go into overdrive. It's really loud. So just because an amp is low wattage, it doesn't necessarily mean you might not need an attenuator or a good master volume. And while I'm kind of on the topic of using slightly larger size amps for your practice, it's worth thinking about what cab and speaker size is going to be most ideal for you. So if you're in, say, a cramped little box room for your practice sessions, that's a situation where, a dinky little practice amp with those small 4 or 6 inch speakers might make most sense. But if you have a bit of space, don't be afraid to use a medium size 1x12, deluxe reverb style sized amp for your practice. It'll naturally give a bit more of a fuller sound with a reasonable amount of low end to it. And a 4x12 half stack is going to be overkill, but if you want a bigger, fuller sound, then I think using these slightly larger cabs and speakers are going to get you there more easily, even for low volume practice. Next, solid state amps. For me, analog solid state amps kind of sit in between real valve amps and digital modeling amps. They're really good if you like real valve amps for their kind of relative simplicity and traditional control layouts, and you don't want to get into too much of the complexity of digital modeling and things like that. They pretty much always have a master volume control, so there's no need for attenuators and stuff. I used this Vox Pathfinder 15R as my main practice amp for a long time, and I think it sounds good, and I really like the more basic traditional amp features it has. There's also the Fender Frontman series, the Marshall MG series, Quilter amps, but analog solid state amps do seem to be falling out of fashion a bit and giving way to more modern digital modelling amps. So if you like the sound of using an analog solid state amp, then there's plenty on the used market by brands like Vox, Orange, Crate and Peavey, brands like that. But to sum it up, my Vox P15R, you know, it doesn't sound quite as nice as my Valve amps, but it does sound nice. You know, it's a good solution if you want a good, no-nonsense, stripped down, basic practice amp. You know, I don't find myself fighting with the tone that much on that amp. I'll be honest, digital modelling amps have taken me a long time to get on board with, but for practice, they make a whole lot of sense. You know, the sound quality is getting better all the time, and the features are just pretty much endless. I recently settled on this Boss Dual Cube LX as my main day-to-day practice amp, and you know, it's great. It has a load of amp models, effects, has an onboard looper, even has a headset for when I'm teaching online I've been using, and deep editing can be done to it on the computer. The downsides are that it was, and still is, a bit of an uphill battle to make it sound the way I expect a guitar amp to sound. I spent a lot of time doing deep editing to all the memories, and it's a similar issue I've had even on high-end digital modelling software like Amplitude and the Line 6 Helix stuff. However, the features and flexibility of digital amps, especially if you're playing a lot of different musical styles, are just unbeatable now, you know. And I am a really fussy customer, you know. I'm just so used to the feel of an analog guitar amp, so don't let me put you off them. If features and flexibility are what you need, then digital modelling amps are the clear winner. If you feel a little bit overwhelmed by the myriad of features on some of those digital amps, there are stripped back options now as well. The most obvious being the Fender Tonemaster series. There's also the Boss Katana series that have a fairly streamlined control layout. I haven't played any of those amps, but people seem to like them, and they seem to be the sort of natural modern equivalent to some of the analog solid state amps that I was talking about before. Just good, simple, straight up guitar amps. Another consideration is to get rid of the guitar amp altogether and just use the amp modelling software. So you would be listening to the sound either on headphones or through your computer monitors or studio monitors or something like that. And the software would be either on your desktop computer, your phone or your tablet. Or you could have that software already set up in a multi-effects pedal unit, you know, or a dedicated amp and cab simulator pedal. And if you play live and say you really get to like those amp and cab simulators in the pedals that you use, that setup you can just rock up to a live venue or a rehearsal and just plug straight into the PA. And yeah, it's not as old school rock and roll, but man, that is one convenient setup. So after going through all those options, you might come to the same conclusion that I have, which is, you know, the best practice setup for me really depends on what it is that I'm practicing or playing. And you can have more than one practice setup in one room. So have a good think about the range of features and things that you need in your practice setup. Do you need a looper? Are you going to be playing along to backing tracks? how important is a great inspiring tone, or are there times when you're just going to be more running exercises and drills and or just anything else where tone isn't quite as much of a priority? In my practice room, I've got my main guitar going into an A/B switch that goes to the valve amp I use for gigging that I have attenuated, that I use for, you know, like I said before, final preparation for gigs, bits of recording, things like that. Or I can send it to my Boss Cube amp, which is my digital modeling setup, which I use for more everyday practice and teaching online. So you can use more than one setup for practice, and A/B switches and line selectors are really handy if that's something you want to do. I hope that's given you some ideas if you're looking at upgrading your practice setup. Let me know down in the comments your favorite practice setup, or if you think I've missed anything here. I know I didn't talk about anything about like headphone amps and things like that. I'm sure there's something else I missed. Keep on practicing and playing, and I mentioned in this video I do a bit of online teaching as well, so if there's anything you think I might be able to help with you playing, then I'll leave my details for lessons down in the description as well.